What if the most moral thing you ever do is finally stop being a good person? Most of us are terrified of our own darkness, so we spend our lives polishing a halo that doesn't actually exist. We have been taught that to be good is to be agreeable, to be correct is to be consistent, and to be successful is to be the version of ourselves that everyone else finds convenient. But there is a secret price to this goodness. It is a slow, silent suicide of the soul. Today, I'm going to show you that the you've been presenting to the world is actually the greatest obstacle to your own survival. And I'm going to give you the blueprint to dismantle it before it dismantles you. This goodness we prize is often nothing more than a sophisticated survival strategy. We mistake our lack of courage for a presence of virtue. We call it patience when we are actually too afraid to speak up. We call it humility when we are simply terrified of being seen. This false morality creates a desert in the heart where nothing authentic can grow because the soil is poisoned by repressed resentment and the constant need for approval. We are living in an era of the managed self. We don't just have identities anymore. We have brands. We don't have personalities. We have curated vibes. We are constantly being watched, not by a distant authority, but by each other. And because we are being watched, we are always on. We are performing a version of adulthood that is so sanitary, so predictable, and so performative that we have lost the ability to feel the raw, jagged edges of our own reality. This is the birth of the manifesto for the unmasked self. This isn't a call to be better, it's a call to be real. And to understand how to get there, we have to travel into the deep, often misunderstood architecture of the human psyche mapped out by Carl Jung. In this digital panopticon, every tweet, post, and professional interaction becomes a brick in a wall that separates us from our true nature. We fear the cancellation of our social standing, so we scan the horizon for the ever-shifting borders of what is acceptable. This constant state of hypervigilance keeps our nervous systems in a low-grade fight-or-flight mode, making genuine rest impossible because the manager in our head never feels safe enough to clock out. To understand the unmasked self, we have to look at how the mask was forged. Jung called this mask the persona. In the original Greek theatre, the persona was the physical mask an actor wore to project a specific character to the back of the amphitheatre. It was a tool designed to amplify a voice and a face so that the audience could understand the story. But in modern life, the tool has merged with the skin. We have become the character we were only meant to play for a season. We forget that a mask is supposed to be removable. When the mask becomes the face, we lose the capacity for intimacy, because intimacy requires two real people to be present, not two polished characters. We spend our energy maintaining the facade, terrified that if we drop it, the back of the theatre will see that we aren't the archetype we've been pretending to be, but something much more human, fragile, and complex. The tragedy begins in childhood. You were born a whole. You were born with the capacity for immense rage, immense joy, intense selfishness, and intense curiosity. You were a wild, uncarved block of human potential. But then, the socializing process began. You realized very quickly that the whole you was a problem. Your parents couldn't handle your rage, it made them pull away. Your teachers couldn't handle your weird questions, it disrupted the lesson. Your peers couldn't handle your sensitivity, they called it weakness. We learn the language of should before we learn the language of am. We are told that our natural impulses are too much or not enough, and we begin to trim ourselves down to fit the narrow corridors of the school system and the family dynamic. Every time we were shamed for an honest emotion, we learned to bury a piece of our vitality, trading our wholeness for the hollow safety of belonging. So, you did something brilliant and tragic. You began to split. You took the parts of yourself that earned you smiles, safety, and high grades, and you put them in the front window. This became your persona, the good student, the kind sibling, the rational worker. But what happened to the rest of you? What happened to the anger, the raw ambition, the strange sexual impulses, the unconventional dreams, the selfish needs? You didn't delete them. You can't delete human nature. You simply shoved them into the basement of your subconscious. Jung called this basement the shadow. This basement isn't just a junk drawer, it's a pressurized chamber. The more we pack into it, the more energy it takes to keep the door shut. We think we are cured of our darker impulses because we don't feel them, but in reality, we have just lost the ability to see them. They are still there, pacing in the dark, waiting for a moment of weakness or a glass of wine to come rushing back to the surface in ways we can't control. The shadow is everything about you that you have deemed unacceptable. And here is the manifesto's first hard truth. Your shadow is currently running your life. Because you have disowned those parts of yourself, they have lost their humanity and turned into monsters. Your buried anger has turned into chronic resentment. Your buried creativity has turned into a midlife crisis. Your buried need for attention has turned into a desperate addiction to external validation. When you refuse to acknowledge your shadow, you become its puppet. It speaks through your accidental, sarcastic comments. It manifests as the physical illness that keeps you from the job you hate. It drives you to sabotaging behaviors in your relationships. You think you are making conscious choices, but you are often just reacting to the ghosts you've locked in the basement, who are pulling the strings of your persona to get the attention they've been denied for decades. We must understand that the shadow is not just a repository for bad traits. It is the reservoir of your unlived life. Inside that basement, you didn't just hide your temper, you hid your intensity. You didn't just hide your arrogance, you hid your confidence. You didn't just hide your sadness, you hid your depth. When you lock away the negative, you inadvertently lock away the fuel for your own greatness. This is why good people often feel so boring, so flat, and so tired. They have no access to their own engine. They are trying to run a marathon on a half-empty tank because the other half is locked in the basement. Think of the energy required to stay nice when you are actually furious or composed when you are actually grieving. That energy is taken directly from your capacity to create, to love, and to lead. By trying to be a pure version of yourself, you have effectively castrated your own potential. The gold of your personality is often buried right next to the dirt you're so afraid of touching. Many people reach the middle of their lives having won the game of the persona. They have the title, they have the family, they have the correct opinions, and yet they feel like ghosts. They feel a sense of identity exhaustion that no vacation can cure. To understand why, we have to look at the ego-self axis. Jung proposed that the psyche has two distinct centers. The first is the ego, the I that thinks it's in charge. The ego is the captain of the ship, but it's a very small captain on a very large ocean. The ego wants safety, status, and the mask. It wants to be liked by the neighbors and promoted by the boss. The ego is essentially the public relations department of the soul. Its entire job is to navigate the external world and ensure that the organism survives socially and physically. It is necessary, but it is limited. It lives in a world of binary choices, good or bad, success or failure, and it lacks the depth to understand the nuance of your deeper calling. When the ego becomes the sole ruler, life becomes a series of transactions rather than a journey of transformation. The second center is the self. The self is the deep, central core of your being. It is the blueprint of your unique destiny. It is the part of you that knows who you were meant to be before the world told you who you should be. In the first half of life, our job is to build a strong ego. We need a functional persona to get through school, find a partner, and pay the bills. But the second half of life, the era of unmasking, is about the ego finally bowing to the self. The transition from ego-driven life to self-driven life is often marked by a profound sense of disenchantment. The things that used to matter, the status symbols, the professional accolades, suddenly lose their flavor. This isn't a sign that you are depressed, it's a sign that your self is trying to wake you up. It's the deep center of your being demanding that you stop being a cog in a machine and start being a human being in a mystery. Directionless adulthood happens when the ego is trying to live a life that the self never signed up for. If your self is a poet but your ego is trying to be a corporate litigator to please your father, your psyche will eventually rebel. This rebellion is what Jung called a neurosis. For Jung, a neurosis wasn't a disease to be cured with a pill. It was a suffering soul that has not yet found its meaning. Your anxiety is not a bug in your brain. It is the self trying to burn down the ego's fake house so you can finally build something real. We spend so much time trying to fix our symptoms, treating the anxiety, the insomnia, the restlessness, without ever asking what the symptom is trying to tell us. These psychological pains are actually homing beacons. They are the self's way of sabotaging the ego's false progress. If you feel like you are failing at the life you built, it might be because that life was never actually yours to begin with. We must look deeper into the self. In Jungian thought, the self is a transpersonal center. It is not just your personality, it is the bridge between your individual life and the vast collective history of the human experience. When you are out of alignment with the self, you aren't just sad, you are spiritually homeless. You are a cell in a body that has forgotten what organ it belongs to. You are functioning, but you are not contributing to the larger harmony of your own existence. This is why the unmasked self is not an indulgence in narcissism, it is a return to your original function. This misalignment creates a sense of profound alienation, not just from others, but from existence itself. You feel like an interloper in your own life. When you reconnect with the self, you tap into a source of energy that is not dependent on your willpower or your caffeine intake. You move from the efforting of the ego to the flow of a life that is being lived through you, rather than by you. The manifesto for the unmasked self demands that you stop trying to be pure and start trying to be integrated. Jung famously said, "I'd rather be whole than good." This is a scandalous statement. We are obsessed with being good, but a good person who hasn't integrated their shadow is actually dangerous. They are the ones who project their own hidden darkness onto the others, the other political party, the other race, the other gender. They are the ones who are perfect at work and then go home and mistreat their families because they have no outlet for their repressed power. In psychology, we see the danger of moral licensing, where someone who believes they are exceptionally good gives themselves subconscious permission to act out in toxic ways. This is why the most virtuous public figures often have the most devastating falls. They didn't have a relationship with their darkness, so the darkness took its own initiative. Wholeness, by contrast, requires an honest accounting of our capacity for harm, which, ironically, makes us much safer people to be around. Integration is like alchemy. It's about taking the lead of your repressed traits and turning them into gold. Anger is a shadow trait for many, but when integrated, anger becomes boundaries and courage. It's the energy you need to say no to a toxic environment. Selfishness is a shadow trait, but when integrated, it becomes self-respect and vitality. It's the energy you need to stop being a doormat. Sensitivity is often repressed as weakness, but when integrated, it becomes intuition and empathy. It's the energy you need to connect deeply with others. When we integrate a trait, we stop being possessed by it. Instead of being an angry person, you become a person who has access to the force of anger when it is required to protect what is sacred. You stop being a selfish person and become a person who honors their own needs so they have a full cup to share with others. You are no longer a victim of your impulses. You are the master of your internal resources. Let's talk about the specific mechanics of this integration. It requires a process called active imagination. This isn't just daydreaming. It is a deliberate, conscious entry into the landscape of your own mind. It is sitting down with that angry part of you, or that cowardly part, or that unambitious part, and asking them what they want. It is a negotiation. You don't let the shadow drive the car, but you stop trying to kick it out of the vehicle. You put it in the passenger seat and you listen to its directions. Why? Because the shadow knows the terrain you've been avoiding. It knows where the shortcuts are. It knows where the water is. This dialogue requires a profound suspension of judgment. You have to be willing to listen to the hateful or ugly parts of yourself without reaching for a moralistic gag. If you listen closely, you will find that these parts are usually just primitive versions of your greatest strengths that have been warped by neglect. By giving them a voice, you bring them into the light of consciousness, where they can finally mature and join the parliament of your personality. When you unmask, you stop projecting. You realize that the things you hate most in other people are actually the parts of yourself you've disowned. The unmasked self is a person who is capable of being dark, but chooses not to be. That is true morality. A sheep isn't moral because it doesn't bite, it's just a sheep. A lion that chooses not to bite, that is something else entirely. Projection is a massive drain on our collective social energy. We spend our lives in culture wars and interpersonal conflicts because it is easier to point at the villain across the street than to admit there is a villain inside our own skin. When you unmask, you take back your projections. You stop needing everyone else to be perfect so you can feel good. You become a person of depth who can look at the world's flaws with compassion because you have already looked at your own. If you refuse to unmask yourself voluntarily, the universe has a way of doing it for you. Jung used the term enantiodromia, the psychological law that states that any force pushed to its extreme will inevitably flip into its opposite. Think of the perfect public figure who suddenly gets caught in a scandal that seems totally out of character. Think of the disciplined executive who suddenly leaves their family for a life of total chaos. This isn't a random accident, it is the psyche demanding balance. If you live a one-sided life of perfection, the other side of you, the repressed, messy, chaotic side, will eventually stage a coup. The psyche is a self-regulating system, much like the body. If you suppress a fever, the infection just goes deeper. If you suppress your need for play, for rebellion, or for rest, those needs will eventually manifest as a breakdown. But a breakdown is often just a breakthrough that the ego didn't give permission for. It is the soul's way of forcing a reset when the persona has become a prison. The manifesto for the unmasked self is your insurance policy against this reversal. It is the willingness to be a little bit messy every day so that you don't have to be catastrophically messy once a decade. It involves the realization that you are not just one person, you are a community of parts. You have a child in you, a sage in you, a warrior in you, and a coward in you. Unmasking means letting them all have a seat at the table. This internal diversity is what makes you resilient. When you only allow one part of you, say the hard-working professional, to exist, you are incredibly vulnerable to life's changes. If you lose your job, you lose your entire identity. But if you have unmasked the artist, the friend, and the spirit within you, you have other foundations to stand on. You become a person who can weather any storm because you are not a monolith, you are a living ecosystem. Think of your psyche as a parliament. If you only let the rational minister speak and you ignore the creative minister and the primal minister, Those ignored members are going to start a revolution in the streets of your subconscious. They will sabotage your relationships. They will ruin your health. They will make you forget why you even wanted to be successful in the first place. The unmasked self is the Prime Minister who listens to the entire room. A healthy parliament requires dissent. It requires the opposition to be heard. When you allow your doubts, your fears, and your unacceptable desires to have a voice, they lose their power to blow up the system. You stop being a dictatorship of the ego and start being a democracy of the soul. This leads to a sense of internal peace that isn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of a process that can handle it. As we move toward authenticity, we begin to see that we are influenced by archetypes, universal patterns of behavior that live in the collective unconscious. In your first 30 years, you might have been driven by the hero archetype, the part of you that wants to win, achieve, and conquer. But as you hit identity exhaustion, you might find that the hero has nothing left to prove. Suddenly, a new archetype wants to speak. Maybe it's the sage, who wants wisdom over winning. Maybe it's the creator who wants to make something beautiful even if it isn't productive. Archetypes are like the software of the human experience. We don't invent them, we inhabit them. When we stay stuck in a single archetype for too long, we become dry and brittle. The unmasked self recognizes that life has seasons, and each season requires a different psychological costume. By letting go of the hero, you aren't giving up. You are graduating to a deeper level of human experience that the hero could never understand. Unmasking yourself means identifying which archetype is currently driving your mask and having the courage to let a new one take the wheel. This is the only way to avoid becoming a caricature of yourself. We've all met people who are still trying to play the young rebel at 60 or the promising ingenue at 50. They are trapped in an archetype that no longer fits. The unmasked self evolves. It does not stay static to please an audience that has already moved on. Evolution is often painful because it requires us to shed the skin of who we used to be. It requires us to admit that the person who got us here is not the person who is going to get us there. This is the core of the midlife transition, the realization that the old tricks don't work anymore. The unmasked self embraces the shedding process, knowing that the death of an old persona is the only way to facilitate the birth of a new, more expansive self. To live unmasked, you must also confront your complexes. A complex is an autonomous part of the psyche, a knot of energy formed around a past trauma or a recurring theme. When a complex is triggered, your persona vanishes and you become a child again, or a victim, or a tyrant. You've seen this happen. You've felt it. Someone says a specific word or looks at you a certain way, and suddenly you aren't a 35-year-old adult. You are an 8-year-old feeling abandoned. The unmasked self doesn't try to delete complexes. It learns to recognize them. It says, my father complex is speaking right now. I'm going to let it finish, but I'm not going to let it make the decision. Complexes are like landmines in our psychological field. If we don't map them, we are at their mercy. Most people spend their lives frantically trying to avoid being triggered, which means they are constantly narrowing their world to stay safe. The unmasked self does the opposite. It walks toward the triggers with curiosity. It seeks to understand why certain people or situations have so much power over its emotional state, and in that understanding, the complex begins to lose its charge. How do we practically apply this manifesto to a world that wants us to stay masked? First, you must resign as the manager of your reputation. The unmasked self accepts that it is impossible to be correct in the eyes of everyone. Your reputation is not your responsibility, your integrity is. Every time you edit your truth to fit someone else's comfort, you are adding a layer of lead to your soul. Stop. Let them be wrong about you. If you spend your life trying to prevent people from misunderstanding you, you will never have the time to understand yourself. This is the ultimate act of liberation. When you stop caring about being correct, you start becoming clear. You realize that people's opinions of you are mostly a reflection of their own shadows and personas anyway. By resigning from the reputation management business, you reclaim thousands of hours of mental energy that can be used for actual living. You stop being a mirror for others and start being a light for yourself. Second, listen to the symptom as a messenger. The next time you feel a wave of anxiety, do not reach for a distraction to scroll it away. Sit with it. Ask the feeling, if you had a voice, what would you say? Often the symptom will say, I am tired of this performance. I am lonely in this crowd. I am bored with this success. The unmasked self has the courage to hear the answer, even if it's inconvenient. This is the call to individuation. It usually sounds like a disaster, but it is actually an invitation to a larger life. Treat your discomfort as a respected guest. If you have a headache, don't just kill the pain. Ask why the body is screaming. If you have a sense of dread about your workday, don't just power through. Investigate the misalignment. Our symptoms are the only way our soul can talk to us when we've spent our lives ignoring its whispers. If you listen to the whispers, you won't have to endure the screams. Third, shift from productivity to vitality. Modern life asks, how much did you get done today? The self asks, how much of today did you actually feel? The unmasked self prioritizes vitality, the feeling of being alive, over the performance of being busy. If a choice makes you successful but leaves you feeling dead inside, it is a bad choice. It doesn't matter how high you climb if you are climbing a ladder leaned against the wrong wall. Vitality is the only true currency. You can have $1 million and be a dead man walking, or you can have a simple life and be electric with purpose. We have been conditioned to trade our vitality for security, but the unmasked self realizes that there is no security in a life that feels like a tomb. Choose the path that makes your heart race and your eyes brighten. That is the only compass that never lies. Fourth, embrace the grief of the old self. As you unmask, you will feel a sense of loss. You are losing the good version of you that everyone liked. You are losing the certainty you used to have. This grief is not a sign of failure. It is the labor pains of your true identity. You have to let the perfect version of you die so the real version can breathe. There is a mourning process required for the life you thought you were supposed to have. Let it happen. Cry for the person you were pretending to be. They worked hard, but they aren't you. Grief is the price of admission for a new life. You will have to say goodbye to the versions of yourself that earned you praise, but cost you your peace. You might even have to say goodbye to some of the people who were only in love with your mask. This is the narrow gate of transformation. It feels like an ending, but it is actually the necessary clearance of the site so that your true self can finally take root and grow. Fifth, practice micro-dosing authenticity. Don't quit your job tomorrow. Start with small acts of honesty. Say, I don't know, when you're expected to have the answer. Admit you don't like a popular trend. Set a boundary that makes someone a little bit annoyed. These small acts build the muscle of the unmasked self. Every time you tell the truth, you are reclaiming a piece of your nervous system from the audience. You're coming back into your own skin. Authenticity is a practice, not a destination. It's a series of no's to what is false and yeses to what is real. Each time you choose the truth over the performance, you are teaching your brain that it is safe to exist as you are. Over time, these microdoses add up until you realize that you are no longer acting, you are simply being. We have been sold a lie that the goal of life is to be happy, but happy is just another mask. It's a temporary emotion. The goal of the unmasked self is not happiness, it is meaning, and meaning only comes from being whole. To be whole is to be complex. To be whole is to be a person who can hold both the light and the dark, both the logic and the intuition, both the persona and the shadow. This is what it means to be a person rather than an adaptive organism. Meaning is found in the struggle of integration, not the ease of compliance. It is found when we stop trying to be a solved problem and start being a living mystery. A whole person is much more interesting, much more capable, and much more alive than a happy person who is simply avoiding their depth. Wholeness allows you to experience the full spectrum of human existence, from the darkest sorrow to the brightest joy. The journey of individuation is the loneliest and most rewarding path a human can take. It requires you to leave the safety of the herd and venture into the wilderness of the soul. But it is only in that wilderness that you will find the life that was actually intended for you. The crowd will tell you that you are losing your way. The truth is, you are finally finding it. This path requires a holy selfishness, the realization that your first responsibility is to the life that was given to you. You cannot truly serve others if you are a hollow shell. By finding your own truth, you become a lighthouse for others who are still lost in the fog of their own personas. Your courage to be real gives everyone around you the permission to drop their own masks. Are you willing to let the good version of you die so that the real you can finally live? The audience is waiting for a performance, but the universe is waiting for a presence. Stop the show. Silence the applause. Drop the script. The mask is on the floor. It's time to breathe. It's time to be real. It's time to be you. This is the invitation to the second half of your life. It is the invitation to stop being a success and start being a presence. The fear you feel right now is the same fear a bird feels before it leaves the nest. It feels like falling, but it is actually flying. Let the false world fall away. The real world is much more beautiful, and it is waiting for you to arrive. Because at the end of the day, when the lights go out and the audience goes home, you are the only one left in the theatre. Make sure you like the person standing on the stage. Make sure that when you look in the mirror, you don't see a polished reflection of everyone else's desires, but the raw, authentic, and beautiful face of your own soul. The unmasked self is not a destination. It is a way of walking. It is a commitment to the truth, no matter how inconvenient. And it is the only way to truly live before you die. Your soul is the only thing you take with you, and it is the only thing that truly matters while you are here. Don't offer the world a photocopy. Offer it the original. The unmasked self is the only legacy that doesn't fade because it is the only thing that was ever truly real.